Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight, you're here to hear from Tom Yuska as he talks about DIY dehydrating, the safe, satisfying, and affordable way to get fresh and home-cooked food into your pack. Tom Yuska, a rover since 2021, has been doing self-supported bike touring for 40 years. For over 2 decades, he ran a summer youth bicycle program teaching kids and teens bike repair and introducing them to the joys of exploration by bicycle. In retirement, he is a volunteer mentor for the Green Crew, a youth-led environmental advocacy and action program of the Minnesota Valley chapter of the Isaac Walton League. His outdoor playtime also includes hiking, camping, backpacking, kayaking backwaters, and cross-country skiing. Please give a hearty welcome to tonight's presenter, Tom Yuska.
Welcome everyone to DIY Dehydrating. I'm hoping that after this presentation, you'll have some interest to try it out. It's pretty satisfying, and you get great home-cooked food on the meal, on the trail. I have a little story about this this cover photo here. That I tend to be kind of an artsy photographer. I'm looking for composition and all this kind of stuff, right lighting and all this kinds of things. And Lori and I did a trip into the Tetons last year, and she's more of a documentarian, so she takes pictures of like the whole process. So when I was putting together this presentation, I realized that I didn't really have any photos of anyone eating my food. So I texted Lori saying, "Do you have any photos of us eating on our trip?" And lo and behold, they came back. But I think what Lori did not know is that she would end up on the front cover of the first page of this. But so now she's a de facto influencer about DIY dehydrating. So there are many ways to do dehydrating. One of the things that I'm not going to talk about very much is like if you do it kind of with instant foods, like you get oatmeal or things like that. And that's pretty simple. This is more about cooking food and then dehydrating it and then rehydrating it out on the trail. I also realized that there's probably a lot of people in the rover community that have done this. So I encourage you to put your comments or whatever tips you have in the chat so people can learn from your experience as well. I haven't done really any kind of dehydrating with meats or fish. So if you've done that, please contribute. And the last thing is there will be, there will be a lot of information here. You don't need to write things down. Near the end of the presentation, Jerry will upload a link to a PDF of all these slides that you can download and then get the information there. So let's get into it here. So what is dehydration? Simply, it's the removal of liquid from foods to preserve it, make it lighter, and inhibit microbial growth. What I'll cover in this this presentation are there's some alliteration, why, ways, and how to dehydrate, some equipment scheduling, the prepping for it, the process of dehydrating, the packaging, a little bit about rehydrating, adapting some recipes, and then just some resources. So why dehydrate? For a number of things. Benefits when you're out on the trail. One, it reduces the volume of the food. You can see in the photos that this was some tabbouleh that I dehydrated. So the top view is the fresh prepared stuff, and then the bottom photo is it after it's dehydrated. So I looked online and they say dehydrating, you reduce about 89% of its original weight. You don't even need to heat up this food. I mean, certainly some of it tastes better if it's heated, but just the kind of cold soak rehydration will give you edible food on the trail. Now, you can determine the ingredients. You can cook the meals in the foods that you want. It's a lower cost. I did some price comparisons. I looked online at REI at some of the backpacking meals they offered it, and later on I'll be talking about a wild rice soup that I prepare, and tried to find something comparable to that, which was kind of a mushroom risotto, and that was about $16 for 2 servings. And I went back and calculated all the cost of the ingredients that I into this wild rice soup, and it ended up being, almost more than 50% or more less cost than buying something that's prepackaged. And then lastly, it's lower environmental load. I use Ziploc bags, which aren't great, but you can take them home, you can wash them and reuse them, and you can recycle them when they're not functional anymore. So many reasons why dehydration of dehydrated food and doing it yourself is a good thing. Simply, how does dehydration happen? Through heat, air, a large surface area of the foods you're preparing, and then low humidity. I mean, moisture, you want to take moisture out of that food. So if a low humidity environment is good. And what we do to do that, what we use to do that, a dehydrator, you can use an oven, but that would probably take a long time and probably not as cost effective as a dehydrator. Or the sun, that was the ancient way of doing that. But from what I've seen, it's probably best for things that are less sensitive to bacterial growth, like fruits and herbs, and in a dry, sunny climate somewhere in the Southwest. So what can you dehydrate? A very wide range of things, from simple things like kind of one-off or one-step things like fruits and vegetables, or you can take a can of salsa and pour it on the dehydrating tray and do that. The same with spaghetti sauces. I've cooked grains like rice, and it's kind of the same thing as minute rice, but to my experience, it tastes a lot better than minute rice. And then you can jump to more complex things like hummus or bean dips or stews, stir fries, lots of things, and also some meat and fish. So lots and lots of things that are adaptable for dehydration. Nope. All right, went up. These are just some of the things I have dehydrated in the past few years. So anything from the simple stuff to fruits to some like mid-meal or midday snacks to some more lunch and dinner things. So what do you need to dehydrate? If we're not using the oven or the sun, then you need a dehydrator. Looking online, the price range of them runs from $80 to $500. Round versus rectangular. There are lots of different websites that we'll talk about. They recommend them. I have the picture on the top is this one I have. My mom gave it to me 30 years ago. It's still working. The one on the bottom is an Excalibur, which online people really seem to like. That's the one that's about $400 or $500. I looked at a review on the New York Times that looked at dehydrators, and so surprisingly, they did not think that highly of the Excalibur one. And what I liked about the New York Times website was they really talked about their process of how they decided that versus other websites that say, these are the ones we like. So in going back up to the slide about round versus rectangular, the New York Times said what you want to look for in features on buying dehydrators: one, round trays, a vertical airflow, so that the fan comes up from the bottom because heat rises, something between 500 and 1,000 watts. My 30-year-old dehydrator is about 500 watts, and it probably takes twice as long as recipes say it should. So I'd recommend buying as high a wattage unit as you can. And then something that has a variety of temperature ranges, which I think they all do. one of the reasons why the New York Times recommended a round one is that they found that a square rectangular one, the heat is not distributed as evenly as the round ones. You have to rotate trays throughout the process. And then buying one that has at least 4 trays if you're doing something that's, you're doing multiple foods or kind of multiple ingredients in the food, it just will speed up the whole process. And then within a dehydrator, you get the tray, but then there are different kind of tray configurations you want to use for different foods. So what you typically get when you buy something is like the tray on the top, which has a kind of a wide open mesh. And that's good for things that are pretty large and chunky, apples or, I don't know, large things. But then if you're cooking something smaller, like some rice or maybe you're dehydrating, you're cutting some vegetables up into chunks, you want to go with something that has a finer mesh. So that's middle tray has a very fine mesh that I just bought online. And then the bottom one is if you're it's a solid surface. If you're doing something liquidy, you obviously don't want it to leak through. So you can buy these solid trays, or I often use parchment paper, which I like because I can kind of flip it over and use it for a second run of something. And it's a little bit more prep, but it kind of extends the use of that particular thing. And I have to go back and wash it again. And then at the other end of the process, when you're done, it's good to have a digital scale so you can measure out your portions very evenly. And then you want to get that food into something that you can take out on the trails. I've been using freezer bags, and I've used both the Ziploc and Glad, and then all these generics, and they all have withstood putting boiling water into that bag and without leaks, and then eating right out of the bag. And then one of the things that's really important about or helpful in doing dehydration is making sure your food is the ingredients you're using are cut very evenly so they dry the same rate. So using something like a food processor, a mandolin, or a grater will help you achieve that. So how do I dehydrate? You need to be very have a lot of scrutiny and have a lot of adaptation, because as this one guy said, there are no absolutes and quite a few variables, especially if you're starting from scratch. So you just need to start playing with it and adapt and kind of pay attention to some things, some markers, which I'll talk about a little while further. So one of the things you want to think about is how is this all going to happen? You probably don't want to make it a night before or a day before task. You need to think about what the food prep times are, preparing the fresh food along with the dehydration times and how much you want to do. Most of the recipes talk about a 4 to 8 hour drying time, but fruits are often longer because they have the skins and things like that. So it could take a half a day to a whole day to do a certain dish. And then you want to think about quantities. My unit has about a 12.5-inch round tray, and it holds 2 cups of food. So doing some calculations on, how much do I need, or how many different kind of loops of dehydration do I need given the units I have to get all the food done that I want to. So on trips that I'm bringing lots of dehydrating food, I'll start at least a couple of weeks beforehand. And again, I think because my unit is kind of somewhat underpowered, it might take you less time if you have a 1,000-watt unit, but just allow enough time before, and especially your first time doing it. Some best prep practices. Not surprisingly, have everything very clean. You're working with fresh food. Use the freshest ingredients. Cut those pieces evenly. Certain veggies, things that would take a long time to cook, like beans or carrots or something like that, you might want to blanch them a little bit just to start the cooking process. And then if you're dealing with fruits that have a natural coating, like the figs or grapes or blueberries and cranberries, they have to be something that's been done to them called checking, where you just basically dip them in boiling water, and that softens the natural wax that's around that fruit, and it helps. It just kind of punctures the surface and helps the moisture inside come out faster. If you're very particular about what your food looks like, and kind of a caveat is almost any kind of dehydrating food, when you dehydrate food, it will not look the same and probably not have the exact same texture as when you cook it fresh. So you have to be aware of that. But if you're kind of really averse to looking at brown apples or brown bananas, you can kind of pre-treat them in a mild acid solution to prevent that browning. So there's a product called Fruit Fresh. You can use some ascorbic acid or water, honey and water, lemon juice. You just add that 1 tablespoon in a cup of water and soak it for a while, and then you can go and dehydrate it. And then at the bottom, there's a couple of websites where I found the references about prepping or not prepping, but doing the pre-treatments. So preparing the trays. This was tabbouleh, because it had the bulgur was pretty fine. I just decided to use the mesh tray. I spread things out to a consistent thickness. You don't want to have a lot of layers. I think the recommendation is about you don't want to have anything more than a 1/4 inch thick because it would just take a really long time to dry. So kind of these dry foods are a little bit easier to get onto the trays, but if you're doing something that's liquid, you have to do a little bit more preparation if you don't use those the solid plastic trays. So the series of photos in the bottom are me preparing some parchment paper for the food. The photo on the left is I'm drawing a circle onto the parchment paper that is kind of the diameter of that opening in the tray. And then I cut it out in the center. I like to kind of make that hole very tight so there's less chance of food kind of leaking through the center. And then on the right, that little video is me cutting out the excess. You don't want to have the paper go over the rim because the way this particular unit functions is that the air is kind of circulating. It comes up the middle and then it will come back down the sides or vice versa. So you want to have those, you can see those little vents open so the air can circulate. But I want to give the parchment paper a little bit of a lip again, so the food will stay inside and on the parchment paper. Okay, so the trays are done. Now I need to prepare this food. And for this example, I'm doing some hummus. So the top left picture, there's the chickpeas and some kalamata olives and some garlic and some cumin. Word it up in the food processor and get that kind of paste in the lower left there. And then you transfer it onto the trays. I globbed it on and I'm spreading it out as much as I can using a spatula, trying to get that 1/4 inch thickness. And I think for this particular recipe that said it made 4 servings of hummus, I used at least 2 or 3 trays. And then timing. I would think that any dehydrator you buy would have some sort of guide for these drying tables, and they may vary from unit to unit based on the wattage and all that kind of stuff. But you can see on this one from my American Harvest one, it really talks about gives you the food and then how do you prep it in terms of how big or small you should slice it. The dryness test is what it feels like or when it's done, and that can be a variety of different states, and then it gives you a recommended time. So I would start with using the recommendations from your dehydrator versus some sort of cookbook. And different foods at different drying temperatures. Again, the range is pretty standard between the cookbooks and the units, but within small ranges. Generally, a test for that is when the food is done, like if you're doing apples or even something like salsa, you don't want to really feel any moisture. You want to squeeze it pretty hard. And if there's some moisture oozing out of it, then you need to give it a little more time. Okay, so this is what happens. This is kind of before and after. On the left is the start of fresh, just fully newly processed hummus, and on the right is after 4 or 5 or 6 hours, and it's really turned to a kind of a dry, crackly state, and it's really like a powder. If I pick it up, I can crumble it, which is great. So I just crumble it. You can put it in a bag, and it's ready to go. The other foods finished states could be different. Some, like fruit leathers, are more pliable. Bananas would be crisp. Tomatoes would be leathery. Again, look for the guides with your units to tell you what you should be looking for each of those particular foods. And if you're doing something like on one of those trays, something liquidy, I would recommend kind of lifting that food up. Say you're doing salsa, and it really is kind of a really flat pancake, like a crepe. Lift it up and see if you can feel any moisture on the other side, because it's a solid tray, the air might take a little longer to get underneath that. So you might want to flip it over. All right, so the food is cooked. We need to get it ready to go out on the trail. So this is a process that I do. I try to divide them very evenly, and you can either divide it evenly based on what the recipe said, or I'll talk about another way to divvy up your food based on how many calories you want per serving, or something like even carbohydrates. But this is where the digital scale comes in hand. So I take an empty bowl, put it on the scale. In this case, it was like 383 grams. Then I even weigh the plastic bags, which are 6 grams. And then I pour the finished food into the bowl, which gives me that total weight of the food in the bowl to 656 grams. So if you look on the bottom, the example is, that's how I figured out how much I should apportion, put into each bag to get 4 servings. So that first set of things in parentheses is taking the weight of the bowl and the food together, subtracting just the weight of the bowl. So I have 273 grams of food there. So I want 4 servings, so I'm dividing 273 by 4. So each serving would be about 68.25 grams. And then I add in the 6 grams for the bag. So each serving on the scale, food and bag, should be 74 grams. Rehydration. Cold soak is, it's an easy way to go. Some of the recipes recommend you're hiking on the trail, you're 10 minutes from lunch, you can stop, pour some food in your bag, and then hike the last 10 minutes. And then when you get to your lunch spot, you're ready to eat. You want to add, and the recipes will tell you, if you're working off an already existing recipe, they'll tell you how much to re-add. If you're starting from scratch, then you want to think about how much water did I put into the original recipe that has been dehydrated out. You want to put that back in, or slightly less. You can play around with what kind of texture or what kind of texture you want, just by varying the amount of water. So I'm using the hummus as an example. I'll put the water in the bag, I'll knead it around, let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, and then check and see if I need a little bit more. If you're cooking a hot meal, you can kind of start the same way. You can do it 2 ways. You can either, if you'd like just get to camp, you can put some water, cold water, into that pouch for the hot meal and just let it kind of slowly rehydrate as you're setting up camp, and then putting it on the stove to finish the cooking. Or you can you can also just put the pot on the stove, add boiling water, and then cook it, give it a little bit more energy through the heat to cook it fast. When I'm backpacking, I'll use like a cheap insulated lunch sack as a koozie. I'll take that plastic bag that has the heated food and stick it in the koozie, and then it'll keep it warmer for that time that it's rehydrating. So talking about adapting recipes, like I said in the beginning, that the color and texture will likely be somewhat different from freshly made, but it's still freshly made and it's home cooked. One pot recipes are easiest to adapt. If you're just doing some fruits or you're just doing a salsa or whatever, you just dry it and it's there's kind of that just single step. You want to use the drying times, the temperatures of the kind of predominant ingredients as a baseline. So if you're doing vegetables, it could be 130 or 135, whatever your unit recommends. If you're doing something that's assembled, which is like multiple things, like if you're doing a stir fry or a pasta, you need to realize that the ingredients may have different drying times. Like the pasta may dry faster than the tomato sauce that may dry faster than the whatever veggies you're putting on. So you got to keep that in consideration as you're thinking about the whole process. And then once you get those all dried, then you need to kind of reassemble them in the packet. So you're going to have to divvy up each of those components of it individually and measure them out to get them of equal quantities throughout all of your packages. If you're thinking about doing something that's very liquidy like a soup, I would recommend kind of backing off on the liquid and turning it into more of a stew. I mean, that's what I did with this wild rice soup. Is you don't want a whole lot of liquid kind of floating around your tray, and it probably would flow over the end. So a little bit of an adaptation in that sense. In general, fatty foods do not dehydrate well, just because they don't have much moisture in them. So because of that, there's an increased chance of rancidity. If you're doing any kind of meats or poultry or fish, you want to choose lean cuts. Again, getting as little fat as you can on that piece of meat. And also you can kind of pre-cook them and get as much fat out as you want. One thing I do when I'm adding protein like fish or something or tuna into my meals is I'll just skip the dehydration part and I'll buy a soft pack of tuna or salmon or something and just add it at the end. It makes it more simple for me. Another thing to be concerned about is just using oil in your recipes. Again, oil doesn't have a lot of moisture. It won't dehydrate. So you want to reduce the amount of oil you have in your recipes. I mean, you can use some to saute, but probably not the amount in the original recipe. So you can bring I bring little vials of olive oil and just add that to the end. I mean, that's what I do with my hummus. It's basically rehydrated with water, and I'll add the olive oil at the end to add some more flavor. Well, that's interesting. I mean, the books I've seen, they talk about dehydrating meat. So I think it's really kind of a contentious subject, and you probably need to be really careful if you want to do that. And then the last one of the things you need to be considerate about when you're adapting recipes is to what you're drying. If you have multiple trays, what you're drying in tandem, because the food aromas may mingle. So you don't want to put your apple slices above your salsa unless you like salsa flavored apple slices. So just keep that in mind. So I'll walk you through a little bit about how I took this autumn wild rice soup that I've made at home and thought this would be a pretty nice meal to have on a cold night and somewhere out on the trail. So in the left column is all the ingredients in the original recipe. And then you can see there's some modifications here. I reduced the water to 4 cups. I didn't use vegetable stock. I bought this something called, it's a kind of a pasty, it's a jar of bouillon base that's very flavorful called Better Than Bouillon. And they have it in the vegetable. They have beef flavor, chicken. It's a nice rich flavor. So I substituted that out for the water. And then the first time I made the soup, I didn't have Old Bay seasoning. So I went online and tried to find out what the ingredients in Old Bay seasoning were and found out they were very similar to what's in garam masala. And I tend to like garam masala really a lot. So I use that all the time now. So in preparing this meal for the trail, I did kind of step 1 and step 2. You cooked all those main ingredients together. Then right at the end, you add in some kale just to kind of quickly cook it. and then some salt and pepper. And then typically, if you're doing this at home, you add in the liquid base, which in this case is coconut milk. But I didn't want to do that again because it's hard to dehydrate. So I left that out and just basically added that on the trail at the end of the rehydration process at camp. And I don't want to carry a 14-ounce can of coconut milk. So there's coconut milk powder you can buy that you can just add, mix with water, and add it to the soup, which works as a pretty good substitute. Here I want to talk about some more about recipe adaptation. Again, this is more about if you're focused on really wanting to dial in how many calories you want per serving or carbs or whatever. There's this great website called nutritionvalue.org, and you can basically build your own recipe. You put in all the ingredients you want, and it gives you information about the nutritional value of that. So what I've done here, I put in almost all the ingredients for this wild rice soup, and I have a little video that kind of works through, what this thing done. It's pretty neat. So if you look at the bottom there, I'm putting in kale. You can select that, and then it comes up. It asks how many units you want. In this case, it had 2 cups. It adds it. It gives you the caloric value. Now I'm typing in coconut milk, and the nice thing about this particular website is it actually has some kind of retail brands that you can select. This needed 6 tablespoons of that. So then my recipe is complete, and I scroll down, and it produces its own nutrition facts readout, kind of a chart. So say I wanted to, we'll go to some examples here. So say we wanted to have meals that have a target of 300 calories per portion. So this 1560 is the caloric value of the whole wild rice soup in mass, not divided up. So what I did was take 1560 divided by 300, and it tells me of this recipe, I can get 5 meals of this soup that will give me 300 calories per meal. If I wanted to look at this in terms of getting at least 60 carbs per meal, just a little bit different calculation. So the carbs for the entire batch of soup are 271 grams. I want to get 60 per portion. So 271 divided by 60 gets me about 4.5 portions of that recipe. So it's a neat tool. It's free. It's kind of a .org thing. You can sign up. You can create an account if you want to save things. I didn't do that. There's also a spreadsheet that it'll print out the caloric values, the vitamin values, all kinds of things of this particular recipe. So it's a really useful thing, even if you're not using it for dehydrating. All right. So just to give you some impetus to start, here's a very simple recipe, just doing some banana chips. And I won't really go through the recipe very much, but it's simple. Simple ingredients. You have bananas, you have the honey water glaze, and you can put some cinnamon on top. You dip the bananas in the honey water, and then you put them on the tray, and you dehydrate, and you have them. So simple to do, easy to try. This one is the hummus. Again, I won't go through it, but most of it is on the front end. You have to prepare the hummus and using a food processor, and then you spread it on the trays and dehydrate it. So I put it up there. You can download the PDF of these slides and try it at home if you want. And then lastly, these are some of the resources I've been using, well, mostly have been using. The first 2 books are really kind of similar. They're done by the same authors, and they're only different in the sense that one is focused on foods that you take on the trail, whereas the Dehydrator Bible is things you can dehydrate and store in your pantry or whatever at home. What I like about these 2 books, and you could buy either, is at the front of this, they have a guide for how you rehydrate individual foods. There's a section on fruits. There's a section on vegetables, herbs and spices, even grains, meats and dairy. So it's a nice reference guide if I'm starting from scratch and just wanting to do a single type of food. The Dehydrator Cookbook for Outdoor Adventurers is something that's there's a nice variety of dehydrating recipes, and they're both vegetarian and meat-based. Pretty interesting stuff from like chorizo or something to some salmon things, and, breakfast through lunch. So that's been good. It was a gift from my daughter, and it's played out well. And the last one is called Lip Smacking Vegetarian Backpacking. There's also one that's not a vegetarian one, and this one is more. It's more one where it's a compilation of backpackers who submitted recipes. So a lot of it is instant stuff that you just buy off the shelf and put it together in a package. So it's not as involved as cooking your own meal, but it's a good place to start if you want, you're not sure, but you want to do some more dehydrating. You can start with that one. And I'm not sure, all these books they might be out of print. I bought them used online. I know you can get them there. So I know the Dehydrator Cookbook is, I think that one is out of print. So look online for the used bookstore sites, and you can find these. And that is it. Any questions from the near or far audiences?
Why? You do a lot of work on measuring calories and all sorts of stuff that I don't do. Why are you so detailed with that? Or how is that important to you?
It's probably from my experience in bike touring and skiing the Birkie that you want to have. Like if you're doing endurance events, at least on the bases, you should be eating at least like 60 grams of carbs an hour. So I think it's just that having done those kind of endurance activities, and I don't want to feel hungry on the trail. I want to don't want to think about my stomach. I want to take those artsy pictures.
Yeah. Close your mouth.
Right. But even knowing, I'm sure if you're doing some backpacking, there are guides to how many calories you should be eating on the trail. So even using just those, kind of a basic, I want to eat these many calories per meal or whatever. So, yes.
I worked with groups to do a lot of long trips, like 21 days to James Bay paddling.
Yeah.
And drying all the food for 8 people, starting well over a month in advance. And a few things we've learned, we've dried a lot of meat, starting out by cooking it, draining it, drying it separately, keeping it separate. It goes in the meal as a separate heat sealed packaging, works great for most of this stuff.
Like vacuum packaging.
Lighter
Yeah.
and less difficult to pack, especially in a canoe environment. And the same applies to a dinner type meal, rather than putting everything in one package. Things dry so differently that you might dry the vegetables here. If there's a meat component, if there's a pasta component, they might be in different packages in your one package for that meal, in terms of that organization. But we've had spectacular results with drying food this way, and only once in that the 21-day trip to James Bay, our food calorie calculation wasn't quite as good as it should have been, and we were all starving to death for fish. People lost 5 or 7 pounds in the course of a 21-day trip. You expect to do that in a lot of ways. Today we'd all love to. But thank you, a nice presentation, and there's all kinds of room to do this for trips.
So is your recommendation, this sounds like you are preparing food for a group of people versus just 1 or 2.
Right, we're doing the whole trip.
Yeah. So do you think that keeping the components separate is as valuable to do for a 1 or 2 person trip versus, when you have 5 or 6 or 8 people or whatever?
Well, we were doing it in part because of the duration of the trip. And, you can't quite get meat as dry as you would like it to be sometimes. Even cutting in this small cubes or, doing lean hamburger things. So we found that both from a rehydration and a dehydration standpoint, sometimes having those ingredients that were quite different, separate, work better. You got a better quality meal.
And kind of a safety factor if the meat did not fare well, then you didn't ruin the whole meal. Okay, thank you. Yes.
No, I've done chili with ground beef and also spaghetti sauce with ground beef, and I dehydrated that. Is there a problem with it? Because I'm doing the meat in there?
There's also a comment in the chat that says that it's unsafe to dehydrate meat, should be freeze dried.
No, I disagree. I dehydrate meat all the time.
Yeah, I think it's pretty contentious. So
I have done backpacking trips on the Appalachian Trail, and almost everything I eat is dehydrated myself, including meat. I do the chicken. You can get the canned chicken that rehydrates really well. It's for hamburger, I like to mix it with breadcrumbs, and then it rehydrates better. Otherwise, if you don't, and of course you cook it first with breadcrumbs, and then the breadcrumbs help to soak up the water to rehydrate it better. So I don't know why people think that you can't do meat. Meat is fine.
thanks for this.
Yeah, I've never had trouble.
Another question from the chat. Kayla is asking about rectangular trays versus round. Apparently.
You're muted, Jerry.
Okay. Oh, I can't do that. Just repeat the question. Once I tell you, repeat the question.
Okay.
Rectangular versus round, or rectangular better for airflow? They're more spacious. What's your thoughts on that?
So the question was the rectangular versus round dehydrators, comparing airflow versus spaciousness. Again, I think I saw someone in the chat said I have an Excalibur, one of the square ones, and it works fine. I only have experience with the round version. So again, it's probably like meat. They both work. I mean, they'll both work. It's just knowing what the capabilities are and the limitations are of your unit, and working with it. So
That may be why I have more success with meat, because mine has a temperature sensor, and I can get it up to 100, and to dehydrate meat, you need to have it at least 155 degrees to dehydrate, and you want it. I have an Excalibur, and so it's got a setting for meat. So
yeah, I would think all the units have a temperature, should have a temperature range dial. So, but the higher the better, sounds like, for meat. Yeah, if you have a comment here.
I've been using 2-foot by 2-foot trays in a homemade dryer for 40 years. And we long ago found that when you can't spread stuff out perfectly evenly, and you kind of expect that, well, at halfway through what I think would be drying time, you pull out a tray and look at it, stir it a little bit, just, move things around as appropriate, put it back in, and come back in 6 hours. Not a big deal.
So the comment here was that using homemade 2-foot by 2-foot homemade trays, it just takes some watchfulness that you look into it after a while, and then move things around, almost like when you're doing your roasting vegetables in the oven. It's kind of discovering what process works for you, being attentive to the food and the state it's in. It's not like a quick, you can just set it and forget it. I think you just need to, be watchful over the process to get the good, a good product in the end. Other questions?
I have a comment.
Comments are good.
Right. So for those who don't know, inside our equipment locker, I believe we still have 2 dehydrators that were donated by some member that can be checked out and used to dehydrate. So you don't have to go buy a $500, $400 unit to start playing with it a little bit.
That's great. I didn't know that.
I have a lot of success dehydrating leftovers. Like my wife, we'll make a little bit too much for a meal, and it's probably not, it may not be get eaten in the fridge, so I put it in the dehydrator, and I can get a lot of meals that way.
So other dehydrators out there, what are some of your favorite meals that you've done?
Talking to you, Pat.
Oh, one of my favorite things is dehydrated watermelon. It is incredible. It is really good.
So what does it look like, taste like in its finished state? I mean, is it a kind of a
It's
crisp thing?
it's almost like a jerky.
Okay.
So it's yeah, and it concentrates the sugars, and oh, it's so good.
And do you eat it not rehydrated? Just eat it in its dehydrated state?
Yeah, you can just eat it straight. It's
Okay.
really good. It works well for a snack on the
Not a lot
trail.
of calories, but it tastes good.
Well, it concentrates the sugars, so it should. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one.
Oh, another comment, vegetarian chili and
Soy curls instead of chicken.
thank you.
We didn't hear that comment here in Zoom land.
What was the
It was vegetarian chili with soy curls instead of
Okay.
chicken.
And I adapted one from a cookbook that's pasta, hummus, sun-dried tomatoes, garlic powder, onion powder, and then some rehydrated whole chickpeas. And Parmesan cheese. It's fun to try and adapt from a cookbook. That's been really good. And I've done angel hair pasta because that doesn't take as long to cook.
right? Thinner pasta will cook faster, right?
Yes, in terms of pasta, you usually have to cut it up into smaller pieces. Don't want to keep spaghetti in its full length because it doesn't rehydrate well. So you want to cut up into like half-inch pieces, yeah, to dehydrate it.
One of the things I forgot to mention in the talk was if you're when you dehydrate things like grains or rice, they tend to be very sharp edged. And if you're rehydrating within that bag, you have to be careful. I would suggest double bagging those because the rice grains, as you're crunching them down or sticking them in your pack, may poke through, and then you'll have your liquid will leak out. So be mindful of things that are kind of really hard and sharp edged, and give them a little more. Give them a couple layers. Chica masala. That sounds good. Yeah, I've done some dals, which are very good.
You talked about hummus. Hummus is really good. It is
Yep.
really good. It's really tasty.
Yep. Curries are good. Yeah. Lentil curry. We've done a tofu scramble, substituting tofu for scrambled eggs. Everything else is kind of the same, so that's been tasty. The influencer in my group really likes that dish. I think that's what was in the cover slide. Right? Yeah. So, Dee, how did you get restocked over the course? I mean, how many dehydrated meals did you make over the whole trip on the AT.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think we did about 7 months worth. And we had our daughter send us resupply boxes through the US Postal Service. And so she would, because they were light, she would send us out probably about 10 days worth at a time.
How long did it take you to prepare all that food?
Long time. We did the same kind of thing as someone else mentioned, is that whenever we prepared our meals, we made extra and then dehydrated them. And, it takes at least overnight for them to dehydrate. And then we typically flip everything and make sure they were dried, and then did another 4 hours after overnight drying, just to make sure it was really dried. But it just took us, it took us weeks to do it, honestly, but
Yeah.
we wanted to we're in our 60s, and we wanted to make sure that we were having good nutrition on the trail, rather than, resupplying in gas stations around the way, and all you can get is ramen and tuna. After at 7 months, that gets really boring. So we had just a huge variety of different foods.
Yeah. Another question for the dehydrating crowd. Your experiences or preferences between like Ziploc bags and vacuum packed?
I usually do vacuuming packing. I do one big vacuum pack bag per day, so I don't have to think about what I'm doing. So I'll pack a day of a food at a time, and I actually do two bags, one for breakfast and lunch, and another bag for dinner and snacks. And
So
so
are the individual meals vacuum packed and then put in a larger vacuum pack bag, or just how do you
the
do that?
individual meals are in Ziploc bags
Okay.
that I put inside of a vacuum pack bag. So then I vacuum pack the whole thing. So yeah, but like you said, I do have to worry about them being sharp. So I like to put a paper towel around them to protect the vacuum pack, because as you vacuum pack it, some sharp things will poke right through it, and then
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yep, we do exactly the same thing, only we vacuum pack it and then we put it in a Ziploc bag. And also use the paper towels, make sure it's, on both sides. And what's great about that, if you get a compostable, one, it's a little bit lighter paper towel, and yet it still has the barrier. And then you have a napkin that you can use.
Yeah.
But you pack that out. So
And
it
I like
serves
to write
two pieces.
what's in the bag on the paper towel too. So then you know
Yeah.
what
Yes,
you
yeah,
got.
you can do that
Yeah.
too. Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
put a
And
little.
sometimes
Go ahead. Sorry.
no, it's in some of the bags that you get that are for vacuum sealed, they have a place to write on it as well. So depends on what you get for your vacuum seal bag too.
I tend to put a little, like rip a Post-it note in half and write down what the food is and what the rehydration process is. And I have to remember to take it out of the bag before I cook it, because sometimes that didn't happen. A little more flavor,
But
yes.
the other thing that we've seen people suggest is making out of uh, uh, tape. The what we made, I sewed a cozy, if you will, out of ripstop nylon. And then I had it a little bit insulated, so it was still light. And that way we heated water for our hydrating meals every night. And both these freezer Ziploc bags, as well as the vacuum sealed bags can handle the boiling water. So it will rehydrate and you can have a hot meal on the trail. And that was always really nice. Because it's boiling water, we made cozies for them to put them in before we rehydrated it, so we didn't have to hold it and it didn't accidentally fall over. But some people we saw made them with duct tape. So you can make a duct tape cozy as well.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's important. You're longing a hot meal and you want to make sure you deliver it in the end, keeping it warm.
Excellent program.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Glad you folks out there chimed in, because like I said, I'm doing it one way and it's done many ways and different experiences. So it's great to add to the knowledge here.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.